The broadcast of the Minneapolis Audit Committee will now begin.
Good morning. Welcome to our adjourned meeting of the Audit Committee. I am Lene Palmisano and I chair this committee. With me today is our civilian representative, Ms. Heather Johnston, Councilmember Jeremy Schrader, and Councilmember Steve Fletcher. We are a quorum of this committee and are authorized to conduct our business. The first item on our agenda today is adoption of this agenda. May I have a motion to adopt the agenda?
So moved.
Excuse me, Madam Chair.
Yes.
Can we do a roll call first?
Oh, I'm sorry. Clerk, would you please call the roll?
Thanks. Committee Member Fletcher?
Here.
Schrader?
Here.
Fisher? Musich is absent. Johnston?
Present.
Chair Palmisano?
Present.
There are 4 members present.
Thank you. I believe Mr. Fisher is just having some technical problems and might be joining us as we continue in our agenda today. First, I had asked if we could have a motion to adopt the agenda, and I did hear a motion to do so by Ms. Johnston. Is there a second?
Second, Schrader.
Councilmember Schrader seconds the motion. All those, is there any discussion about today's agenda? All those in favor of today's agenda? Oh, actually, I think I need to call the roll because we're doing this remotely. Clerk, please call the roll.
Committee Member Fletcher?
Aye.
Schrader?
Aye.
Fisher? Johnston?
Aye.
Chair Palmisano?
Aye.
There are 4 ayes.
Thank you that the adoption of this agenda is approved. I should mention that our ability to participate remotely today is due to the local public health emergency, our novel coronavirus pandemic declared on March 16th, 2020, pursuant to provisions of Minnesota Statute Section 13D.021. The next item on our agenda today is accepting the minutes of June 15th. May I have that motion?
So moved, Johnston.
Seconded, Schrader.
Thank you. Any discussion about the minutes from our meeting a couple of weeks ago? Seeing none, I'll ask the clerk to call the roll.
Committee Member Fletcher?
Aye.
Schrader?
Aye.
Fisher? Johnston?
Aye.
Chair Palmisano?
Aye.
There are 4 ayes.
Thank you. The purpose of adjourning this meeting to today, as my colleagues will remember, is so that we could ask our audit director to work with us and to come up with some potential additions due to the change in our environment in the past month, and to consider more work with our public safety functions and potentially things that might be critical to the recovery of our city after civil unrest. With us today is our internal audit department, led by interim director Ryan Patrick. Director Patrick, would you be willing to step us through our risk-based integrated audit plan?
Certainly, Chair Palmisano. I'm not seeing it up on the screen, but one thing I'd like to note is that we do have projects related to public safety to add to the audit plan or recommend to be added to the audit plan. The supporting information about why we think those are relevant projects is contained in the auditor update slides. So we have first on the agenda, the actual plan itself, and then the supporting information. I can certainly present that PowerPoint related to police before we adopt the integrated audit plan, so you have that supplementary information.
Yeah, that seems appropriate. Would you please?
Yes, so it looks like the auditor update is on the screen now.
With others' permission, does that work for you for us to go through the reasons why before we officially adopt the audit plan? I will assume by There we go. Sounds good is what they're saying. So yes, please. Thank you, Mr. Patrick.
Certainly. Can we go to the next slide? So just a recap of the description of the request. We adjourned the June 15th, 2020 Audit Committee meeting to this date, specifically to return with proposed rolling audit plan amendments that address policing and public safety. At the time, the incident was obviously still fresh as it is now, and the audit team needed some additional time to develop how we might add public safety to the audit plan, and this presentation satisfies that request. Go to the next slide. So it was a very busy few weeks as we wanted to capture all the different and relevant voices in this conversation and get input from everybody. We could certainly sit down as an audit team, and we did, and discuss what possible projects we could add, but without the voices of the audit committee, people in the civil rights department, police department, and the community, it just wouldn't have been as robust. So in the 2 weeks, met with very many people and tried to take the ideas that they had, the things they saw important, and incorporate those conversations into an audit framework. So we, as was sent out and as is on the agenda, sent out a risk matrix. It's the spreadsheet that was attached to the agenda. As you can see on that, there were a number of ideas, more ideas than we could certainly tackle in any short time frame. And that's why we score projects based on the complexity, the impact of the work, and the velocity. So complexity being how hard would it be for our team to complete that work in a reasonable time frame. The impact, so not addressing those, given all the risks involved, what type of impact would control gaps have on the organization? And velocity, how quickly things are changing. Are things changing rapidly that would require us to step in and do our work as things change? And it's important to have a mix of those things. We can move on to the next slide. Because we obviously have a limited capacity as an audit team to do this work. So the work that we're doing that's in progress is still relevant. It's open audit issues, continuous monitoring, our COVID response, our park board grants management, and upcoming audit projects are still very relevant. Those haven't gone away. We intend to continue working on them. So we recommended these additions specifically to balance how high of an impact they might have, the complexity and velocity, and our general time to complete. We wanted to make sure that we picked relevant projects while respecting the fact that our team does have limited capacity. And it's worth noting that all of these projects require collaborative effort. These aren't projects that the audit team can simply go back and do on our own. They require the participation of a number of people around the city, and people are busy right now. So respecting their time to make sure that we do this very challenging and very relevant work was necessary as we discussed capacity and figured out what projects we'd like to add to the audit plan. And so I'm going to be recommending 5 additions to the audit plan at this meeting, and we can see the amended audit plan at the end of the presentation for timelines, but I'm going to walk through each of the 5 projects, again noting that all of the feedback was very relevant, and what you see on that spreadsheet are projects that we could do for the next 2 years or more. I want everybody's voice to be captured. All those projects are relevant, and we intend to address many things in the future as we develop capacity. So the first item that I'm recommending be added to the audit plan immediately is the body-worn camera audit process that appeared in the Minnesota State Department of Human Rights temporary restraining order. This process was intended to be added to the Civil Rights Department, particularly the Office of Police Conduct Review, their work plan. They were to review body-worn camera videos for patterns of discrimination, misconduct, improper behavior, things that didn't meet community expectations. And given that this was an audit-focused recommendation, we thought it would be very relevant to have audit participate in developing that project. We are subject matter experts when it comes to developing audit processes, and this would allow us to work with all the relevant departments on this project to make sure that the program that's developed meets the high expectations that the Minnesota Department of Human Rights has for this. So this would be a consultation working with the work group on this project, which is already underway. You can go to the next slide. The second is the consultation work on the field training officer program. So that when officers finish their work in the academy and they go out into the field, they're paired with a field training officer. And that officer is supposed to ride along with the new recruit or cadet and teach them the ropes, show them the ropes when they're actually out on the street. But as we've seen several high-profile misconduct cases, and the recent incident that occurred involved officers who had multiple complaints and were field training officers. And so our concern in the conversations that we had with all our relevant partners discussed what controls and management oversight are in place to assure that new officers are trained in accordance with MPD standards and expectations. What controls does MPD have in place to ensure that the highest quality field training officers are selected, making sure that they're adequately trained so that they're supervising staff to the highest expectations? And what oversight is in place to monitor the work of field training officers as they're out there doing that work and working with the new recruits? Move on to the next one. The third is the post-licensing process. So as part of a officer's minimum job requirements, they must hold a license from Peace Officer Standards and Training. They're licensed by the state in the same way that I'm licensed as an attorney and many other professional organizations are licensed. And that is a minimum job requirement for an officer. If they do not have a license, they cannot work as an officer. So per post, licensing is a cooperative process between the post board and the hiring agency and the candidate. So in our case, that would be the Minneapolis Police Department and its officers. And this is an ongoing process. Officers have to renew their licenses over time. And if they don't renew that license, or for example, if that license is taken away, they no longer meet the minimum job requirements and can no longer work as a peace officer. So our question in conversations with the various partners was, how does MPD communicate with post in instances of officer misconduct? And as that ongoing renewal for licenses take place, what is MPD doing to ensure that officers who do not and should not have a license no longer have that license? So I know audit doesn't have jurisdiction over post, obviously, but MPD plays a big role in the process, and our concern was that we want to make sure that the process is as tight as possible when an officer engages in misconduct or other actions that warrant losing that license, that we are communicating adequately with post. So we can go to the next slide.
Mr. Patrick, just a quick question.
Certainly.
Did you have conversations with post during the development of this project or ranking of this project?
We have not yet had conversations with post. We did have conversations with MPD, and while this process wouldn't necessarily reach into post work, we would reach out to them to discuss the process, and our focus is primarily on how does MPD interface with them in instances of misconduct. So this is focused not as much on post, but it would highlight that process, but more so on how MPD communicates with post throughout the life of a misconduct case and the resulting actions that might be taken.
Thank you. Ms. Johnston.
Just a clarification, I understand that that wouldn't focus on post, but thank you, Madam Chair, sorry, I'm getting a little informal here. That it wouldn't focus necessarily on post, but wouldn't it be important for us to understand like what they do with the information once they get it as well? Is that a piece of this?
I think absolutely that's a piece of this, and we can use Minneapolis related cases and other cases where officers were decertified to look at that process, and hopefully in this instance, as we reach out to them, they'd be willing to cooperate and explain their process to us. MPD has communicated with them, and it would be focused on MPD's response to them, but we would reach out to post certainly as part of this project.
Thank you.
So project 4 relates to after action reviews. After there's a critical incident, a settlement that might be large or small, and a small claims award, there is likely a process by which the city reviews what occurred during that incident. identifies any gaps that might have occurred that allowed the situation to happen that led to the lawsuit, and a process to review it so that we don't repeatedly make the same mistakes if mistakes occurred in that situation. So we want to work with the teams who look at those issues and ensure that that process provides insight into how to address control gaps and prevent future payouts. And we know that in the future we have significant after-action reviews coming up. This is going to be an ongoing issue related to COVID, related to civil unrest, and how we move forward. And as this is a really important process for the city as it works with public safety, it's also an opportunity for audit to increase its capacity and knowledge in this area. So I think it would have a dual benefit, both because it's critically important to make sure that we're addressing these types of issues moving forward, not making the same mistakes, but also to develop audit's capacity and understanding of this very, very important field as we move forward. Move to the next slide. So the fifth slide, this is perhaps the most complex and the most complex to explain, but I think it's incredibly important work and likely will have the longest timeline of a project to complete, and that's the directed activity data analysis. So what do I mean by that? As many of you know, there was a 911 dispatch study completed that contained recommendations where the city took a look at how MPD was responding to 911 calls, whether it was efficient, and could we reimagine how that might occur to have better outcomes. There are all sorts of other non-discretionary activities that police do. And what do I mean by non-discretionary? People are given guidance, assignments, and orders on how they're to carry out their jobs. I see this as a companion to 911 response. When they're dispatched to 911 call, they're being given a direction to resolve that call. This is another example of an instance where officers are getting direction to go out and do something, and we would like to capture that data as a compendium to the 911 dispatch study. As we're reviewing how our city directs police officers to carry out their jobs, it's important that we have the whole picture of what management is doing. And this study will look and add data to that conversation about what other directed activities are occurring in the city. And so this also serves a dual function of supporting a potential future review of investigative unit procedures, resources, and outcomes. As investigators or sergeants in the police department and the various specialty units do investigations, it's another form of directed activity. And this is a lead-in into that and would allow us to better understand those processes so that we could evaluate those functions in the future. But this is I think, very important work as we add knowledge and focus data to the conversation about all the various ways we are deploying officers to work in the city of Minneapolis.
Thank you, Mr. Patrick. I think that is so important, and it's important to add into the conversation because so often people speak about the work of our police department in 911 call response, and that is extremely important and critical, but it doesn't even touch any of these other pieces and parts. And so thank you for bringing this into that work. Are there any questions or comments from my colleagues about that one? I'm not seeing any, but go ahead.
Okay, so the final kind of ongoing project that we intend, it's not necessarily something for the audit plan, but it's work we intend to continue doing in the background. It's specifically benchmarking research. So this is going to be important background information that we have to inform our plan and ongoing audit work in the future. For example, policing management structures. As we look across the country, there have been a number of departments who are doing things differently, a number of departments who've been highlighted as having unique capacity to do their work, or unique management structures to do their work. So we would like to, in the background as we're doing this work, be continuing to find that information, collect it, and build our understanding of how those departments work so that we can use it as benchmarking information for understanding how our department works. So while this isn't necessarily tied to one audit item, I think it's worth noting because this information came up in a lot of the conversations. People were interested in what some of these other departments were doing. And so this work would continue to collect that and allow us, as we're doing our current work, to use that to inform how we issue recommendations and talk about this moving forward.
That's great. I will note that Mr. Fisher, Mr. David Fisher, has joined us. Welcome, Mr. Fisher.
My apologies, Madam Chair. I don't know what the problem is.
No problem.
So this, what you see in front of you now, is the proposed 2020 audit plan. These are the additions, and the additions we thought we could complete within a reasonable time frame. You can see the first 3 items are italicized because that's what we're currently working on now. Those are the projects in flight as we speak. The non-italicized items, those are ones that we agreed to add to the plan and fully intend to work on within this year. And then the items highlighted in yellow are the ones that I just discussed. So this is the order in which we would queue these up. The body-worn camera audit program that I discussed, that recommendation, or that order from the state is currently active, and we have a window in which we are to complete that process. We need to be working on that right now if audit is going to be a relevant partner, so that seemed important to add as an item for 2020 Q3. We would begin work on that immediately. We thought also that the field training officer program, this is something, because of the way that it's structured, we thought that would be something that audit would be comfortable with starting in Q3 and completing in a reasonable time frame. And then the Q3, also starting the directed activity data analysis. We want to start that. That is going to be a long-term project. That is not something we can complete in a quarter. It's going to take a lot of work, and so starting it now certainly makes sense. Q4, we would like to spin up the MPD involvement in the post-licensing process. As we hopefully have completed earlier projects, we'll have more capacity to start working on that. So that would be a Q4 project when we begin it. And then if you go to the next slide, while we're not voting necessarily on the proposed 2021 audit plan, these projects continue into 2021 for sure. And this is a rolling plan. While it might have a date at the top of it, the plan never stops evolving. Projects don't end on December 31st. And so it's good to look out, even if we're not necessarily voting on the 2021 audit plan. But to note, the 2021 Q1, the after action lawsuit review, we'd begin that work. It's quite complex, and we believe we'd have the capacity to start that in Q1 of 2021. And then the last 3 items that you see highlighted were items that were tentatively on the 2020 audit plan, but we thought, given our capacity, these would need to move to 2020. They don't have a, I'm sorry, 2021. There's a typo on that slide. We don't have quarters on the 2021 projects per se, except for the first 2. We could prioritize and move those around to start those sooner rather than later if we needed to. So the revenue and collections audit, the cybersecurity and risk management audit, like I mentioned in the last meeting, we will have coverage related to data governance in 2020. This is the more technical cybersecurity risk management audit that would take more specialty work to complete. And then the affordable housing audit. Obviously, things are changing pretty rapidly in the city, and that will be a very complex and very important project. We think it would be better suited for 2021. With that, that is the structure that we thought would best address both impact projects, allow us to balance the complexity with our current capacity to do this work, and things that are changing are going to be very relevant in the conversations that we have over the next 6 months to a year. That's how we thought best able to balance all that work. I would note, though, again, please look at that spreadsheet. That will be something that we use to inform the conversation moving forward. That will be a living document that we intend to continue to update and track what projects we think are relevant to MPD and public safety auditing. And I will continue to add to that as I have further conversations with the audit committee, the community, and those involved. So I try to capture everyone's feedback in that because it's all very good quality feedback. Obviously, we can't implement everything right away, but everyone's voice was heard, and I'm very interested in doing a lot of the work on this project, on these projects.
Thank you, Mr. Patrick. Trevor, I'm going to need to ask if you would put the audit plan, the tables back up again. There are a lot of questions and comments. I just wanted to give you a chance to finish talking through kind of the whole schedule and then what comes off of this year's plan and goes into next year. But the first question or comment part of our conversation is from Councilmember Fletcher.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you, Mr. Patrick, for this. I really appreciate the thoughtfulness of this approach, and I think this does get at some things that we've had questions about. So I think it's going to be really helpful to get this work. One question that I had is on the directed activity data analysis, which we so need. I think it really is valuable to understand what outside of 911 dispatch is the activity that is happening and that we're talking about moving forward. I was just in a conversation over the weekend with some members of PCOC about work that they intend to do, and I want to make sure that we are not duplicating effort and sort of see how this, how these things relate to each other. I think they were interested in maybe looking at self-directed activity, which may or may not be the same thing, so there may be sort of 3 different lanes of work that we need to consider, or it may be that you're already working with them and you can tell us that, but I just want to make sure that we are moving in a way that's really taking advantage of the resources of the city rather than duplicating them. And I know PCOC, I think, is going to sort of kick off that work in a meeting later this week. So if you can just sort of speak to how this fits with the work that's ongoing in addition to the 911 response study, that would be great.
Certainly. So I have continued to have ongoing conversations with members of the PCOC because the work they do is also really critical and does bear a lot of similarities to audit work. And I do see, as all these various functions work together, so the special project that was done on 911 call response, our look at directed activity data analysis and their look at discretionary activities. Well, it's not, it would be oversimplifying it to say there are 3 buckets of police activity in the city. The discretionary activities and officers driving around in their squad car, they see something, they stop, they get themselves involved, they put themselves on a call, versus an officer is given a very specific detail to go out and do, let's say, specific traffic enforcement in a corridor in Minneapolis, versus an officer gets a 911 call to a domestic assault and they respond to that call. So I do think we could kind of, in the broadest sense, look at police activity in those 3 spheres. Our analysis is focused primarily on that directed activity, the second activity that I talked about. And if the PCOC is working on data specifically about that first that I mentioned, an officer discretionary activities, depending on the depth of this data analysis, we could have a much more robust picture of how MPD operates in the city. So I fully intend to continue to discuss projects with both current and former PCOC members as strong representatives of the community, and I hope that our work can supplement their work, the 911 call study, and just add a lot of information to this conversation.
Thank you. Ms. Johnston?
Thank you, Chair Palmisano. Director Patrick, my question was, you had talked a little bit about best practices and benchmarking, and it seems like on these projects that we're talking about adding the FTO, the Field Training Officer Program piece, as well as the post discussion, would be really good opportunities for benchmarking and best practices being integrated in that analysis. Will that be a piece of that work?
Absolutely. So as part of our general audit process, we would do benchmarking work. It's a general part of how we address these issues. So I didn't want to imply that we're not going to be looking at benchmarking as we look at these processes. We will be looking specifically at when we're working on a project like this, trying to find benchmarking information that specifically relates to the issue at hand. I just also wanted to note that we will be looking at benchmarking data broadly. So we're going to be doing best practices research, not just on the field training officer program as we do that audit, but as we continue to work on these subjects throughout the foreseeable future, we'll be doing a broader and look out to best practices across the country.
Councilmember Schrader.
Thank you, Chair Palmisano. I just wanted to comment briefly on the audit of the affordable housing. I think this is the right move to move it to next year. I think I think as the director has pointed out, we've got much more pressing issues right now, and I think they lend themselves to audit. I did want to make kind of the point of when we started pursuing the audit of how CPED does affordable housing. The CPED had not done some of the work that they have done. Like, they were able to come up with, I thought, a very good plan that showed the spectrum of housing and how they are working on getting more affordable housing at every price range and what their strategies for that. So as we look toward 2021 and doing that audit, I think it would be worth reconnecting with that group and really seeing where it would be helpful for audit to come in and make sure that those systems are working as they've been kind of changing them over the last year.
That's some good context. Director Patrick, did you want to add anything?
I think that makes a lot of sense. And I mean, you could rate so many of these as high velocity in affordable housing, just given all of the incredible changes that have happened this year. And I use the term incredible and almost unbelievable. We didn't foresee ourselves being in this position come January, yet here we are. And as we deal with COVID, as we deal with all the conversations in public safety, so many of these things are related, and affordable housing is incredibly important. And I think taking a look next year when we have more information and can develop a more robust project, it makes a lot of sense. Thank you.
Yeah. Since Mr. Fisher is on the phone and can't put himself into queue in the meeting chat, I just wanted to check in with you, Mr. Fisher. Did you have anything that you wanted to add to this before we go through our motions to approve?
No, I think the report is very well given, and I appreciate the hard work that our internal auditor has done on this.
Great. Then, colleagues, if you will entertain this new business item number 3 first, which is about our 2020 audit plan. First, something we realized in agenda setting and had a lot of discussion about was that we had actually never formally retitled the 2019 plan 2020. As you know, this is a rolling plan. These are multi-year plans. We've built out what we feel comfortable about in audit committee and saying, here's our trajectory over time. But so the motion here is to first formally retitle the 2019 annual risk-based audit plan as the 2020 annual risk-based audit plan, or otherwise known as the 2020 audit plan. Second would be to approve that, and third would be to approve our MPD related consults and special projects as part of our 2020 plan as outlined by Director Patrick here. May I have a motion for that?
I'll move that, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Fisher. Is there a second?
Second, Schrader.
Thank you, Councilmember. Is there any additional discussion about this plan or this motion at this time? Seeing none, clerk, would you please call the roll?
Committee member Fletcher,
Aye.
Schrader,
Aye.
Fisher,
Aye.
Johnston,
Aye.
Palmisano.
Aye.
There are 5 ayes.
Thank you. Those changes to our audit plan are adopted. I also think, Mr. Patrick, there isn't any additional pieces of the report for internal audit today, is there?
No, the report was delivered, so that was the focus of the meeting.
So I will then also just move to receive and file that update of our work in progress. May I have a motion?
So moved, Johnston.
Johnston moves.
Second, Fisher.
Mr. Fisher seconds. Clerk, would you please call the roll?
Committee member Fletcher, Schrader,
Aye.
Fisher,
Aye.
Johnston,
Aye.
Chair Palmisano.
Aye.
There are 5 ayes.
Thank you. That report is formally received. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. We are done with our agenda today and are looking to conclude. And I just want to thank and appreciate our internal audit team, our whole team who's with us here today. As far as I can see, that this is an ambitious plan, but it's one that I know you're all very capable of taking on. I do love how our department, while small, is able to really make a lot of impact around our city and to really always be relevant, very relevant to the things that are of concern in our community. So thank you very much. We look forward to looking forward to hearing about your work at our next audit committee meeting. So until then, we will stand adjourned. Thank you for your time.